Okay, so first I'd like to say thanks to Laurent and for HitBite for inviting me, and also just to the RubyMotion community for helping me build this game, yeah. So just to introduce myself, I'm Paul Sturgess, I work for Kyan. We're a web design and development agency in Guildford in the UK, which is just outside London. The majority of the work that we do is actually with Ruby on Rails. That's my background. So I've been using Rails for about 8 years, and I've been doing RubyMotion development for 2 years since the 2.0 release, about the time that OS X support came around. So yeah, you can get me on Twitter. I blog about RubyMotion, not as often as I'd like, but a lot of the content in this talk has actually come from blog posts. I'm sure I'll write up again about it afterwards and put the slides up and stuff. And you can find out more about Kyan, who I work for, at kyan.com. So what is TitleChallenge? It's a football simulation and strategy game. It's for iOS, iPhone, and iPad. It's currently free, so check it out. It's Kyan's first game, and it's an internal project for us, which is unusual because most of our work is client-based, and most of our work has also primarily been in the past websites. So it's a single-player game, and essentially you manage your favourite football team, and you're trying to win the league and grow your club. And you get to pick the team, the tactics, choose who to buy and sell from your squad. You can invest in like training facilities and scouting and monitor your finances, things like that. The reason that we built it was because myself and my boss, also called Laurent, we love football management games. We were very, very addicted to them, but especially the older ones from like the 1990s and sort of early 2000s. And those kind of games hark back to an era where it was all just a lot simpler. It was really fun and fast, and we just thought they were kind of ideal for the mobile platform. So I've got a video here that hopefully runs. Yeah, so this is the tactics screen. You hold and they wiggle, and then you can drag all the shirts around, a bit like your app icons. And tap on a player to switch them out. And then you can swap them over like that, and it auto swaps. It does a bit of intelligent positioning. You can slide out the subs bench, tap on those to swap them out. So that was one of the most like fun screens to build, one of the best screens. This is the match screen, which is, you know, classic commentary based thing. A lot of games nowadays are 3D, fancy graphics and all this kind of stuff, and we were like, none of that. Let's just have the text and a bit of retro action. So it's just really fun to pick up and play. So yeah, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So the reason I've got this up here is when I started a project, like I said, I was a Rails developer building websites, applications. I had no mobile application experience, no game development experience. I didn't know Objective-C. I didn't know RubyMotion, no memory management. Basically, I didn't know a lot. But the reason that I'm saying this is not to show off or boast or anything like that. It's just that if you've got an idea, then just go for it, and don't be afraid to figure it out as you go along. It's definitely the hardest thing that I've built, but it's the most fun I've had, and it's the most I've learned from any one project that I've done. So for this talk, I'm going to go through the user interface, our approach to prototyping, also how we used pure Ruby. I think that's one of the main benefits of RubyMotion. How we handled the persistence and using core data, and just a few bits on memory. just some debugging tips and things. So for the user interface in TitleChallenge, it's all laid out in code. I wanted to avoid Xcode. That was kind of one of the attractions to RubyMotion to me. You can use all your tools that you're used to using. So there's no, I didn't use interface builder, no storyboards. Every screen was hand rolled. I didn't actually use any DSLs, not because I have any strong opinions on them, it's just that they weren't particularly mature at the time. And I know Amir said that he took the chance on ProMotion, but I obviously didn't fancy that. But one of one of the main reasons for me is I actually wanted to learn the Cocoa Touch framework. So the only real way of kind of getting in with that is to, you know, roll your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty, as it were, so to speak. But I did use auto layout, and I'm so glad I did, because when we started, like iPhone 6 Plus went around. I did use a DSL for this actually. I used Motion Layout, which was created by 37 Signals. I understand I'm not sure this is entirely maintained, but the auto layout interface, as long as that doesn't drastically change, then there's kind of it does the job. I think does it really well. Although I did read about with iOS 9, there's going to be UI stack view, which apparently can handle creating auto layout constraints for you without you doing it. So I'd be interested to see how that pans out. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday for the blue potion, red potion stuff, so but I'll have to catch up on that later. So I'd like to talk about Revere Lap, which is a third-party app that we used. Initially, I thought it was just kind of a gimmicky thing, because you can see your app in 3D and you can kind of spin it round and zoom in and out, and it looks kind of flash to show your mates who don't really understand what it does. But actually, it turns out it's really, really useful for debugging. There's a lot of times when I'd be laying out things and I wouldn't have like a height set on something, or something would be hidden behind another view. And on the simulator alone, it's difficult to find and see what's going on. Whereas with Reveal, you know, you can just spin it around and say, oh yeah, actually it's tucked behind there. Or the other thing you can do is on this panel on the right-hand side is change any of the attributes, like the frame or the bounds or whatever it is on the fly, and it will update not only in Reveal but also in the simulator. So it's just a really nice way of debugging your layout. The last version of Reveal, they've actually added support to show you the auto layout constraints as well, which is a really nice feature. So it's something they're actively improving. And essentially it just saved me loads of hours. So I'd like to talk about how we did the kits in TitleChallenge. You can see on this graphic we've got quite a few different styles and colours. And this was a problem that we faced, or it's probably one of the largest problems we faced with TitleChallenge. The game includes over 250 clubs. Each club has 2 shirts, a home and away version. You've got the front and the back, and you've got substitute bibs, and then with 16 squad numbers that are all on there. It's basically a lot of combinations. And then when you add on to that all the different screen sizes and resolutions, it just seemed like madness if we were going to draw all of those. So our solution to this problem was to create layers of vector graphics. So you've got like the little white bit at the top, there's a collar, the number, the bib, that's the stripe version, the black, but it could be, you know, the hoop or quarter or whatever. And then you've got a plain back there and then a sleeve. And essentially with these, it meant we could dynamically display, hide, color and scale each graphical component to generate any kit. And this is obviously all good in graphics, but how did we do this in code? And this is where actually another third-party app came in called PaintCode. And as a user, it's actually really simple. You essentially input your vector illustration, and then it outputs, you can see it there, the code, which you literally can just copy and paste out. And the code is just Bezier curves and paths that you can use with your CA layers. So it's really flexible. You know, you can use all different fills and strokes, change the frame, and it all scales nicely for you. This was just a great solution to our problem. So we actually ended up using it not just for shirts, we did all of our icons as well. The one drawback with PaintCode is that all of the output is in Objective-C. So hopefully if lots of people from the RubyMotion community tell them that they love their app, and they might add support for it. So these are a couple of the illustrations we had done for the app, and because not everything went through PaintCode, I was looking for other solutions to avoiding the whole checking device types and loading different image sizes. And it turns out that Xcode, although I wanted to avoid it, for this solution makes it really simple with the asset catalog. So essentially you just select which devices you're going to support, and then you just drag and drop the different images in, and it gives you a name for that image that you can use in your code, and then it just figures it out. It knows if it's on an iPhone 6, it will use that version, and if you're on an iPhone 5, it will use that version. They also do the icons and your launch images as well. And the nice thing about those is when you select what you're supporting, it will automatically warn you if you've got the wrong size image, or there's something wrong with the alpha transparency or something it seems to always complain about. And it just flags it up. The other nice thing that Apple say, although I don't fully understand how this works, but it says that they are compiled into a runtime binary file format, which apparently reduces their size, which is going to make your app smaller and faster to download. So all in all, it just seemed like a nice way and a neat way to handle all the images. So I'd like to talk about our approach to prototyping. We did look at various third-party tools for doing like flat prototyping at the start of the project, but we actually found that because we didn't have like a huge overarching plan for the game, that trying to design every single screen up front, the whole workflows, all that kind of thing, it didn't feel like the right way to go about it. We wanted to build the minimum viable game as quickly as possible, and RubyMotion really lent itself to this process. So we just went for really, really minimal styles. Here we've got a pixel font that we were trying out. You can see it's the iOS 6 old style. We were just building each screen as we needed it. So we've got like a squad screen, a league table, some fixtures. We just wanted to get it on the device into our hands as quickly as possible. This is 3 versions of the game screen. So as we were prototyping, we would just make small iterations. So you can see we're just gradually adding features, moving buttons around. And we just wanted to get feedback really essentially as quick as possible. Just keep playing the game, feeding back, does this work, does this screen flow work? But we weren't afraid to switch from adding features to then working on the design. And the reason we did this was it just kept enthusiasm up on the project. We weren't getting bogged down in nitty-gritty details, and it also allowed us time to continue playing the game without meddling with features and seeing if they worked and deciding, does that screen flow work, or, the button's in the right place, thinking about the features. And the other good thing about doing it all on the device is it meant we discovered issues with our design as we were going through, like practical issues. So here you can see we've dropped the pixel font. We decided that it was too inflexible. And these are the kinds of decisions that we could only make once we'd actually got it on the device and we're using it in practice. If we'd have done it all flat, then we wouldn't have necessarily discovered this. It was just essentially all about getting a working version as quickly as possible. And the final versions look markedly different. But although we were tweaking the look and feel of the game throughout, all the screen flows and decisions around layout had been long since made. And so towards the end, it was only really, colours, icons, a little bit of positioning, but not much. Generally, the game was kind of finished, and so we could just go back and just basically polish as much as we wanted, happy with how the game functioned. So, to talk about using pure Ruby in RubyMotion, for me, it's one of the main strengths. So the game engine in TitleChallenge is entirely in pure Ruby. I actually had started writing it before the project for what I was building in my own time for, it would have been a web-based multiplayer football game. And then Laurent approached me about doing it as a mobile app, and we were able to take that engine and repurpose it. It was by no means finished, but we weren't starting from scratch. I just love the whole idea of the separation of concerns. That when you think about it, the game engine, why should it care that it's a RubyMotion app at the front end that's interacting with it, and not a Rails app or whatever it might be? It means that if we go down the road of developing an Android version, then we've got a game engine that we can use. Again, we haven't got to start from scratch. The other thing that's really good is, I'm a big fan of RSpec, and it meant I could just use RSpec for all my tests in the game engine. It also makes them really fast because I don't have to fire up the simulator to test it. So the game engine isn't actually the only part of the game which is its own gem. I've pulled out as much of the logic as I could and just made them into gems. None of these, they're all private to the application, but it just means that they can benefit from what I've just talked about there. So, yeah. The reason I wanted to talk about this, I don't want to get too dry on core data. Not going to bore you with it, but it does. I think it sometimes gets a bit of a bad rep or a bit stick, and it's definitely not a fancy version of SQLite. And I can understand why people feel that. I kind of thought maybe it was that. Coming from a Rails background, particularly, like I've this Apple described core data as a framework for object lifecycle and object graph management, which is a bit of a mouthful. And to get your head around that, coming from Rails, I'd certainly seen my own fair share of tightly coupled active record and database layer apps. So, but anyway, let me get on with how we use core data, because I think this will explain the benefits and why I think it's actually really good. So in TitleChallenge, there's a lot of processing that needs to go on. Like on the surface, the game can seem very simple, but it needs to feel and behave like football does, because football fans will tell you when certain players don't move to the right clubs and all this kind of stuff. So there's like 6,000 players in the database, and each game week they'll be updated with various things. So yeah, transfers, training, scout reports, the transfer list. There's basically a whole bunch of stuff. So our first step to this was to make the loading screens look nice, so at least you don't mind seeing them so much. So we've got the illustrations, we've got a few of those that come in, and we've got a whole bunch of random quotes. I did spend time as well optimizing the code. But I think when it came down to it, there was no getting away from the fact that there's a lot of processing to be done. So I needed to think about it in a different way and maybe changing when we did the processing. And this was where core data came in. So this is the stack. The persistent store coordinator is essentially your interface, in our case to SQLite, but it doesn't have to be. It is an implementation detail. And then you've got 3 contexts, and you don't have to have 3 contexts, so that's how we've done it. And essentially, each one of these is a copy of all the objects in your database in memory. And this is our master. The private writer context is the master, and when that's saved, it's saved to disk. And then you've got a child of that, and this is our default one. And that's everything on the interface. So when you're actually loading screens, it's coming from there. And then the child of this is everything that's happening in the background. And the smart thing that we decided to do was to do all of our updates, so the things I talked about, with transfers, scout reports, all that kind of stuff, and have it going on in the background whilst you, as a player, are doing things like picking your team or scouring the transfer list, that kind of time. And so the idea is that it's doing the processing while you're not actually waiting. It turns out that core data is really fast at just merging changes from one context up the chain to persist. So the only not the only, but one of the bigger challenges of going with this route is essentially we're processing the changes ahead of time. So if you imagine the user's picking their team and in the background transfers are happening, you could, in theory, buy the same player that's moved club in the background. So when it hits done, I wrote some code that just handles conflicts for that kind of thing. But in the end, that felt like a trade-off worth making because of the time that was saved in the processing. For implementing this, I actually used Magical Record, and it's a kind of a similar story to the DSLs that I said earlier, that there just wasn't really anything mature enough at the time, and we wanted to get going quickly. A Magical Record is actually an Objective-C library that's very mature. I think if I was looking at it now, I would probably be looking at Core Data Query from the guys at Infinite Red. I haven't used it, but it looks like a great library. So to talk about memory and TitleChallenge, like I said earlier, I didn't have any experience with it, and this was always kind of my fear at the start of the project. And TitleChallenge definitely suffered from all these things. So I think my advice would be that I kind of wish I'd started debugging on this kind of stuff earlier. So just to go quickly through, so cyclic reference is the last object in a set of objects, and it still references the first. So I did go and use like weak references everywhere, and that was great. But in some instances, I actually found it better to go avoid the kind of delegate pattern and use NS Notification Center, which is actually really great for just pinging messages around your app without actually tying objects together. Leaked memory and abandoned memory are, well, they're easily confused, but they're not the same. Leaked memory is memory that was allocated but is no longer referenced anywhere, and so it can't be released. And whereas abandoned memory is, you can set this up by accident, by like a cache or something that you store things in, but you never actually use, and if you just don't even use them, you're probably never going to release it. So to talk about how I debugged those problems, these are all quite crude, but I kind of found they worked, and I think if I'd baked them into my process earlier, then it would have made my life a lot easier. So you've got an amazing did receive memory warning method there on controllers that you can implement. And I think this just is a no-brainer, because if you just log from these, then as you browse around the simulator, you can fire off memory warnings. And you can see then what's logging from controllers that long since should have been released. For other non-controller classes, you can use NS Notification Center again, and this time you can subscribe to memory warnings. So again, using the same method of just browsing around, you can ping the warnings and then just see where your objects are still logging, and you're like, hang on a minute, those should have been long gone. You can also simulate memory warnings on the device, but you'll have to use private methods to do this. I went for the option of essentially in the app delegate setting up like a timer and just pinging off memory warnings like every 30 seconds. So then on the device I could see again how it was behaving. Because essentially you could receive these memory warning notices at any time, and it's important that your app responds to them. You need to essentially you need to be what Apple calls a good citizen, because otherwise if you're not responding to these warnings, then your app's going to be first in line for getting killed off the device. And then instruments is well worth mentioning. I use particularly the heap shot analysis for the abandoned memory, and there's also specific leaks tool. Those could probably be talks in themselves, but they're well worth reading up, and Apple have got lots of documentation how to use them. So just a couple of final tips to finish on. Don't use up all your beta testers. So in our kind of enthusiasm of getting it eagerly into the hands of all our friends and family and everyone we knew, we just gave it to them all, and the problem with beta testing is it will probably go on longer than you think, and you need kind of enthusiastic beta testers at every phase, so it would have made more sense to kind of drip feed it out, I think. And then the last one is don't underestimate the final 1%. However long you think that final few features are, whatever they are, it's probably going to take double, if not more. So that's it. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah, I don't think I used the rate tasks in the end. I think I was just using instruments, and when you hit record, it would just fire up the app if you've pointed it to the right one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Earlier you mentioned implementing the game engine in pure Ruby.
Yes.
Testing it with straight parsec.
Yeah.
Did you ever run into cases where you'd done something in pure Ruby that wasn't necessarily implemented in RubyMotion?
Yeah, like things like auto release pools and weak references. I think I just created like dummy classes so that they didn't do anything in the tests. But yeah, that. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward. Yeah. It was just trial and error, to be honest. It's such a hard problem. That's why, like I was sort of saying, that I wouldn't say any of my tips are particularly beautiful, but they kind of did the job. You know, if you log stuff, then and I think that was my problem. If I'd have done that earlier, I probably would have picked up on what kind of problems they were, and then you obviously learn from that and know how to avoid it going forward, rather than trying to do it at the end and then going, oh. Yeah.
Would you be willing to share how many hours went into this?
Yeah, a lot. It was about a year and a half work.
It was what?
Year and a half.
Not full time though, right?
Yeah.
Full time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talking like Amir said, you know, you kind of have to do it because you love it. For me and Laurent, this is like a life goal of building a football manager game on mobile.
Was it both of you working on it?
Yeah, he was doing like you know, helping with game design and stuff like that. I mean, I'm also like very lucky that I work for a company that does client work, and so we'd always done web dev and not really done any kind of mobile stuff, and never had any mobile stuff to show. So for us, this is also kind of a showcase of what we can do. We're already winning work off the back of it, so you know, I'm not trying to pretend like we're we're making our own living off the back of this game, but it's just, yeah. I think that answers your question.
Build on that, I was going to ask, you might not even know this because you're probably not on the finance side, but are you revenue positive? Do you expect to ever be revenue positive? Timeline on that?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, yeah, I mean, our intention at the moment is to say we made the game free. We did go paid, and then we made it free, and then realised that because we've got some in-app purchases for boosting like your finances, and it turned out when we made it free, we got enough more players buying the IAPs to do better than when we had it as a paid-for app. So, and we were just like, let's just make it free and get more people playing it, and yeah, it's.
Have you thought about making it like kind of multiplayer where like users within proximity could use Bluetooth to like trade players back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole load of ideas of stuff we have that we'd like love to do, but yeah, so. But the reaction's been really positive. I mean, we don't have nearly as many reviews as Amir, but our average is 5-star, so that's pretty cool.
One thing that really helped me was asking for reviews.
Right, yeah,
But you want to just do it at the right time.
yeah.
Like right after they win a game.
Yeah. Not if they've lost 5-0, yeah.
With asking for reviews, like you won't get any reviews hardly if you don't ask.
Yeah.
If you ask for it,
Yeah.
Oh, we can keep asking questions. The food is ready, though. Just saying.
I do have one more question. So I'm an American, so football to me means something.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about the fact that you're kind of excluding the biggest market, perhaps?
Yeah, we know that's always like, but then I don't know. There's not much you can do about that. Like that's what we wanted to build, and yeah. We're well aware that we're up against some very, very big players as well in the European markets that use like Premiership managers to advertise their games and stuff. So you know, we're not trying to beat them, but yeah.
Okay. I was just checking my email, by the way, and I saw that I have like this thread of, okay, here's the first round of questions, and then that was a year ago. So I want to apologize. We will finish the success story
Oh, right, yeah, no
interview
worries.
quickly. But for now, let's go next door and eat lunch. And thanks again, Paul.